Yes, I'm Harvey Reed from the Minor Corporation. The first time I've been here, I really enjoyed it. It was last year. I'm glad to be back. Glad to be speaking, and I'm fully aware that I'm the person standing between you and your first break. So that may or may not be an issue. You know, we're all carbon-based biological organisms with certain needs. So we have slides, and just for people that follow along, there's the agenda, there's the bios, and those are printed out. You have the papers are online. These pictures, the paper was already like 20 some odd pages, so that all the slides up here, they do not appear in paper. So if you combine them, it works. If you just have the slides, then that tells the story. What we're going to talk about is the circular economy and what may be holding us back, what might end up being socio-technical enablers, meaning you can't just have technology, you got to work with people. And as the previous speaker pointed out, you could have a beautiful point capability, but you need to be able to integrate into each nation state's regulatory and other frameworks going on. And you also need to integrate into the global space economy. So everything is about integration. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. The previous speaker talked about a point capability, but we're going to talk about, and you can see the team up there. And Nate, raise your hand. He's on it, many other people. And also Ruth Stillwell in the audience. She's been very instrumental leading up to this. We're going to be talking about the circular economy. We have a picture up here from NIST. Wearing other hats, I do NIST work, and you'll see some of that shine through. Next slide. Okay, don't mind if I do, but it's not. All right, it's anyway, so I can talk. So what we want, okay, thank you. So what we want to do here is to just reiterate without spending a lot of time. If people have looked at circular economy, generally it's don't waste, clean up, we treat everything like a nice state park and we don't leave things behind. But there's a lot of factors, easier said than done, mainly because, being a global space commons, everybody's doing stuff, you might leave a little bit of stuff behind, and so, so the whole debris thing is an issue. There's a speaker I saw this morning who's going to talk a lot about that in terms of trying to clean it up. But there's additional issues in terms of, well, if we want to be more sophisticated in terms of, gee, could we manufacture in space? Could we repair in space? Could we do maintenance? Could we have supply depots and all that kind of stuff? That implies that there's, let's say, very sophisticated coordination among many independent actors. So this is the flip side of what the previous speaker was talking about, where you have a point capability, you're integrating it into national and also space activities. Here we're talking about, well, what's holding us back from doing complex operations necessary for the for a circular economy. And so what we get into in the paper is what the challenges are. There's many challenges, and in particular the ones outlined in red. If you want to achieve things like maintenance and keeping better operational track, and even more, but he talked about this last May. I don't know if he's here right now, but his ears are hopefully burning. He testified that if people want, it was House testimony responding to White House initiative about doing more, the manufacturing, repair, etc. And if you want to do that, you're going to have many, many, many parties who need to cooperate for a specific activity, and they may be disengaged. So it's kind of like what we do here on Earth. You want to do something, you get a bunch of commercial, government, academics involved in something, you do stuff, and then you disengage. In space, it's a lot more complex. And his admonishment in his testimony on page 3, if you have access to that, and we have a footnote paper for it, is that the activities should be tracked so that if something goes wrong, you can trace back liability. If you can't trace liability, then the insurance companies, the reinsurance companies, and so on and so forth, they can't function. So there's a lot to be said for being able to keep track of what's going on. So if you look at those challenges, now it's in the upper right, and you look at the, how do you advance along the roadmap to get to a circular economy? The analysis that we've done over the past several years has led us to believe that there's a chasm. And presently, right now, if you look in the lower left, there's people working on sharing space situational awareness and all this other kind of information, and sort of involved, if you go to a space con, you can get the, the daily catalog update and all that kind of stuff. But there's a gap between that type of awareness, which may be out of date information, and being able to more tightly coordinate your actions, which is going to require a different way to operate in terms of sharing information and coordination. And that chasm, you can see the dotted yellow circle there, it's in red, hard to see on the screen, but socio-technical enablers are required, and the pinnacle of the first pyramid over there is decentralized information sharing. So we're starting to see the first glimmers in supply chain, which I'll talk about a little bit, on Earth, terrestrial supply chain, where some of the coordination required to track parts, like, let's say chips that are, let's say, very, very small number of nanometers, and, let's say there's sanctions against certain countries, and you have to track where the chips came from, make sure you have the right stuff. That level of cooperation requires sharing information beyond just, I have a system, you have a system, let's exchange information. It requires cooperating and sharing it more in a peer-to-peer decentralized way. And in fact, there's emerging cases where some of that sharing is using ledgers, and in fact, in big pharma, in trying to track controlled substances as they're sold back from dispensaries, let's say Walmart, or let's say Walgreens, actually, they're participating in it. They want to sell some substance back because the patient doesn't need it. Hopefully it's because of all the reasons. You have to track down to the pill bottle. When the FDA changed that regulation, that sort of freaked out the pharma industry, and FDA did not want to help in terms of the tighter regulation to go from a lot size to a pill bottle size. So the companies got together. They hired another company to maintain a ledger for them. It's called MetaLedger. Look it up, MEDI Ledger. It's an excellent case study, and it's operating today. And they're tracking the reverse logistics. They do not share information that's proprietary. They share just enough to make sure the cooperation happens. It's a stellar case. And last year when we were here, Nick Samus, he was talking about cyber information and the fact that people are kind of shy. What happened in space? I don't know. I got attacked. And people, operators might be shy in terms of saying, well, something happened, because they don't want to divulge, or they don't want to get into IP and privacy or their own private data. These are things that people need to work through and need to learn. But there are examples where companies can cooperate for things that they know have to get done. They can share minimal information. We called it in the paper last year, minimal viable information, and use decentralized data technology so that everybody that's sharing that information, using that capability, ledger or otherwise, can trust that the data is there. They may hate each other personally. They may not really trust each other with each other's kids, but they will trust that somebody wrote information to a ledger and somebody else can read that same information. That's it. And what we're observing right now is that that's one of those chasms that has to be crossed. And if we can, you look at the triangle way in the lower left, then you can cross the chasm to get to the other upside down triangle that everybody wants to get to. Oh, how do we get to norms? Well, everybody needs to cooperate and hold hands and kumbaya. But if you can't trust that everybody's operating with the same data, according to, whatever the critical operation is it manufacturing gone wrong and somebody bumped into something and made a mess and everybody's liable? That's a happy thing, because it could be a lot worse, where, maybe it's causing some type of, even worse accident, just bumping a little bit, maybe uncomfortable, maybe killing people is really, really bad. How do you trace back the liability? How do you even know who did what? And part of our team here, Gabrielle, she's looking at cislunar activities, lunar settlements, mining on the moon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as you get further and further away from Earth, and we talked about this in the paper, you end up being able to let's say, rely less on Earth. So if something goes wrong on the moon, you gotta wait for a while. Not just the 3 days transit, you might have to wait for people to spin up so they're able to launch. As the previous speaker talked about, heavy launches from fixed spaceports, you have to be timed and, so if you're in a lunar settlement, for example, and your supplies are running low or something happened, or maybe somebody else orbiting the moon, they had the crash land and now they're knocking on your door, hey, can I come in? And if you can't keep track of activities, then how do you solve that international dispute? Especially if the people are coming from countries, they may like each other, but the leaders back on Earth, they may not like each other. And if you can't trust information, even if one country doesn't like another, then we're gonna end up not being able to achieve the circular economy. So all right, so 5 minutes. So interrupt whenever you want. Now, in this lower diagram here, yeah, so this thing right here, this is indicating that that would be like achieving ignition, hopefully easier than achieving fusion ignition, which seems to always take 10 more years. It's kind of like the money pit movie. But people are starting to use ledgers and cooperate, enter into agreements, and then move on. This is happening in the commercial world. And I mentioned that we're in another category with NIST. If you go to the NIST, NCCOE, there's a National Cybersecurity Center, and look on the manufacturing page, the most recent project to pop up there is one that I'm working on. It's based on, this is all in the paper, based on some work that was published last year doing case studies, looking at examples on Earth, people cooperating, using ledgers, people with different competing commercial interests, obviously there. And we're starting some prototype work. We want to be soliciting for FREDAs, so that's coming up in about probably 2 months, to create a construct called a traceability chain. It's not here because the project description of it is still needs to be reviewed and everything, but traceability chains where using multiple ledgers and everybody can do their own thing with the ledgers, you'd be able to create an immutable chain of activities so that starting wherever you're at, let's say you received let's say it's in space and you received an assembly, and the assembly has a chip, has some software, has some actuators on it, and you're really concerned about the pedigree and the provenance of some of those components, you'd be able to use that traceability record, and within that record, you have pointers to go back to whichever other ecosystems are involved, and then get access to those, and then eventually back to the source. So you could eventually make your way back to the microelectronic manufacturer, and then be able to determine if you want to use that part. So these are real things happening, and the request to this group and other space community groups would be to say, okay, well, if NIST, and by the way, the Global Semiconductor Alliance people, they're the Internet of Things subgroup in there, they are bonkers over this type of concept, and they help some of the thinking with it. So if people on Earth can figure out, we're starting to figure out how to cooperate, even if you have different competing commercial interests, is it too much of a stretch, or is it doable to then say, well, could that translate to space, and not just different commercial interests, which would still exist in space, but maybe competing international interests. That's really what's on the table. So let's say we can cross that chasm, we can start using ledgers and other decentralized ways to enable peer-to-peer cooperation. Then once you're past that chasm, then we can start looking at, okay, well, how would you build out these socio-technical enablers based on decentralized methods? And we have in the paper, we have some of them, you can see all the crazy acronyms up there. But if you follow the, what they mean, they get into supply chain, they get into good cybersecurity work done with Space ISAC, which is still ongoing. There's been a track record the past couple of years and it's still ongoing for this year. CISA is there to, they're part of DHS, and they track dependencies. Well, they track a lot of things with critical infrastructure. And one of their tasks is tracking dependencies of terrestrial critical infrastructure on space. And the thought that I'm gonna leave everybody here with is, if you want to track supply chain problems, that is a material dependency. But if you also have operational dependencies on other services, are we tracking that? And if something happens to those operational dependencies, how do you respond? How do you link it up? How do you mitigate that? So I'll stop. I'm getting the stop signal. If anybody has a question, then you could reach me during the break time, I guess. Is that right, Allison? Okay, she's giving me the now. So that's it for now. Thank you.